Hi, my name is Jenn Bernert, and I'm a licensed mental health counselor in Seattle. And Ryan and Max here invited me to talk today about motivation, and particularly how to find motivation in while you're doing remote learning. That's a particularly tricky situation to be in, and so I'm hoping today that I can give you kind of an overview of what motivation is and how to find motivation when you're finding that you're going through periods where it's lower. And then there's also some great questions from you that I'll try to get to a few of those before we're done. I'm gonna share my screen so that we can look at some slides together as I talk. So finding inspiration while learning remotely can be challenging, as we all know. Before we get into what motivation is and how to find it, I want to just take a moment to start with where we're all at this moment. We have a lot of uncertainty happening in the world, a lot of political uncertainty, and all of you are in the situation of remote learning because we're in the midst of a pandemic. So all of that extra stress and uncertainty makes it even more difficult to think of our kind of psychological needs, or to think about things like, how do I motivate myself? It's really important just to understand the context within which I think we're talking about motivation. Also, the pandemic has really shined a light on the gap between, people who have privilege and people who have less privileges. And so also what that means is that while we are all sharing a certain amount of experience around the pandemic and other stressors in the world right now, we're also finding ourselves kind of in different places. And there are some students whose families are really struggling right now with things like unemployment, sometimes homelessness, conflict. There could be increased conflict in your home because you're at home together more of the time. And some students are even dealing with feeling kind of unsafe in their home environment. I think it's really important just to take a moment and think about the fact that we all have different experiences within our home and different privileges that kind of change the experience that we're having with even remote learning. If we're not getting enough to eat, if we're not getting enough sleep, and also if we're just feeling worried about our family's financial situation, and if we're feeling unsafe, then that makes it exponentially hard to find motivation, to log on to your Zoom classes, to do your homework. So for those of you who are listening, if there are those listening that feel like that might be something that's happening for you, that it's not just, I don't have motivation, I don't feel like it, but you've got these additional stressors going on, then I really encourage you to reach out to an adult that you trust, whether that's someone at school or someone at home or someone in your neighborhood, to get the extra support that you need. And Ryan and Max, I did include in this slide, there's a number that you can text, 741-741, with the word home, and that provides like kind of some tech support for any students who are struggling with any kind of stress, any kind of mental health concerns. It's an easy way to kind of reach out and get a response quickly from a trained adult. So the next thing that I want to talk about is kind of what motivation is. I think we should kind of define that concept. And there's a lot of different theories about motivation, but one of the prevailing theories is that there's something called intrinsic motivation and there's something called extrinsic motivation. So intrinsic motivation is like that drive to do something because we want to. In Japan, they call it ikigai. So it's doing something worth getting up for in the morning, which I like that way of thinking about it. So some examples that I could think of were creating art because it inspires you, engaging in sports because you like the way it makes you feel fit, it gives you energy, a genuine interest or curiosity in a certain subject. Eating balanced meals because you want to be healthy, cleaning or organizing because it makes you feel calm. And even like arguing with people can be intrinsically motivated. Like some people just like the challenge, right, of a debate. So those are some examples of intrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation is driven by a desire for a reward or to avoid punishment. So it's really driven by what's happening outside of you. Examples would be like being motivated by your grades, right? Like, I really want a higher grade in this class, so that's what's going to drive my motivation. Monetary reward, right? So, you know, if you have a job, right, most people say they show up to their job in part because they're getting a paycheck. Extrinsic motivation can also be like public recognition, you know, like getting a reward or a certificate for something, winning like in a competition. Social status could be another example. FOMO, like fear of missing out, and also, again, avoiding a consequence. That can also be an example of extrinsic motivation. Max and Ryan, before I move on, I'm just curious, can either of you think of any examples kind of come to mind for either of you?
I would definitely say for me, an example of intrinsic motivation would definitely, you touched on it, sports. I love participating in sports, and in a way, I also think it touches on extrinsic motivation, where sort of like you want to go to the gym so that you will get stronger, and that's all for your sport. So that's an example for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just had one that stuck out to me was just like the extrinsic one of like knowing you'll get rewarded with a higher grade. And I
Yeah,
think that just really speaks to school and everything that's like going on right now.
definitely. I know that that's something that some students are utilizing right now just to kind of keep them on task when it comes to school assignments. So that's the difference. So there's two types of motivation, intrinsic and extrinsic. You can see how they're driven by very different things. So let's see. This next slide talks about questions you can ask yourself if you are wondering how to build the extrinsic motivation. So what could I get or avoid by doing this thing is a good question to ask yourself if you're noticing that your motivation is kind of lower. So questions to ask kind of within that are, is there a reward for doing this task? If I do this assignment for this class, is there some sort of reward for that? And that reward could be just the grade, right? Or it could be something else. Is there recognition by teachers or peers that would feel good if I do this? So, you know, would you get a call out from a teacher or, you know, a peer that would say, nice job on this? And would that maybe be a reward that could motivate you? Could I avoid a consequence by doing this? So maybe the consequence is a lower grade. Maybe the consequence is your parents know that you have this assignment that you need to do. If they find out, they're going to be disappointed. Maybe there's a privilege they might take away because you didn't get something done. Also, like, am I missing out on something by not doing this? So sometimes that one can be a little bit of a harder question, but you know, what comes to mind for me is like maybe you've got a class that you need to zoom into and you don't really want to go, but maybe you know that if you don't go, you're going to be missing out on some information that you're going to need later. Like, I really don't want to go to class, but I have this assignment that I know is going to be due down the line. If I miss class, I'm going to miss out on the information that I need to actually get that done. So I'll miss out on information. And so if I miss this class, I also might not be able to do my assignment. So those are some good questions to ask yourself, again, when you're trying to build extrinsic motivation for yourself. Intrinsic motivation, if you're trying to increase that, the big question is, what's in it for me? So how will it benefit me to do this? How is doing this going to help me achieve a personal goal of mine? And how does doing this align with something I value? So sometimes when we don't have any external rewards or benefits that we see, we can look internally and ask ourselves, like, is there either a short-term or a long-term goal that maybe me doing this task would make me more likely to achieve? Is there just something I value maybe that would help me find the motivation to do this? So those are really, really important questions to ask yourself when you're finding, again, that your motivation is lower. And sometimes, like, the question about how does this align with something I value, you know, one thing that I often recommend that people do is kind of make a list of their values. Like, what are like the 5 top important things to you at this point in your life? And sometimes you can then have that in front of you and be thinking about the tasks that you have lower motivation for and thinking about, okay, I don't really want to do this, but I notice, right, that doing this homework assignment does align with this value I have around my education. Like, even though I don't really value this assignment, right, I value my education. I do want to graduate from high school, so I can see how those two connect. So sometimes it seems like a little bit of a stretch, but kind of thinking a couple of steps ahead and thinking about how this assignment in the moment is kind of related to something down the line. I also want to give you guys just some like easier, kind of quick kind of action steps you can take when you notice that motivation is low. So as I talked about at the beginning of this talk, start with basic needs. You know, if you're noticing that you haven't gotten enough sleep, if you're noticing you're not eating enough, start there. Even if that's just like a quick snack that you can grab, or even if that means, you know, like a quick nap, setting a timer and saying like, okay, I'm just going to let myself rest, but I'm going to set a timer so that I don't end up sleeping the day away. So start with those basic needs first, because those are the things that actually fuel the other parts of our body, our ability to kind of mentally kind of think something through. Also, be your own coach. You know, develop some kind of daily mantras you can say to encourage yourself. Our thoughts are really powerful. So if you're thinking to yourself, I can't do this, I don't know how I'm going to do this, there's no way I'm going to get this done, that really leads to some self-defeating feelings. So anything you can think of that you can say to yourself to kind of keep yourself going, you know, I'm doing the best that I can. Today was a rough day, but I can start over tomorrow. Any sort of kindness, right, that you can kind of talk yourself through on a daily basis is going to help you get through those really hard moments. As I mentioned in the other slide, identify what you value the most, what you're most interested in, and start your focus there. Sometimes I think of that as like low-hanging fruit. It's like the easiest, you know, start with the easiest thing. So if you're most interested in math and you've got, you know, a bunch of different subjects you need to catch up in, go ahead and do the math assignment first. Sometimes that helps kind of build some momentum. You get the math done and you feel like, okay, I still have a little bit of energy, I can move on to the next thing. You can create some short-term goals for yourself and then kind of break down the steps to achieving them. That helps with motivation because it decreases the amount of overwhelm that you feel. When we feel overwhelmed, it's really hard to motivate. One of my favorite kind of like, this is actually a procrastination tool, really related to motivation too. Don't focus about the finishing of something, focus on starting something. So don't think about the whole project, the whole assignment, the whole class. Just say to yourself, I'm going to get started and I'm going to see how much I do. Even if that means like logging onto a Zoom class, like I'll just start the class and then see what happens. Reward yourself anytime you can, you know, build in rewards to your daily routine. Like, okay, if I get through, you know, this class, I know I have a break and then I'm going to reward myself with, you know, 15 minutes of playing video games or talking to a friend or, you know, going outside. But whatever it is that you are really looking forward to, try to build that in actually as a condition of doing something you don't want to do. So it's kind of like pairing something positive with something that you're not as motivated to do. And then, you know, if you can't find a reason to do something, just find a reason to avoid something. So if you're like, I can't think of any reason to go to this class, try to think of like, well, what will I maybe avoid, you know, if I don't go to this class? Is there a consequence maybe that I want to avoid? And how can I focus on that to kind of get me through this? And then last but not least, like lean on your supports, your friends, your family at home, teachers. I really, really can't encourage students enough to just reach out. There are so many people right now who understand how difficult this is and who really care about the experience that each of you is having. And like I said, if you don't have a trusted adult or friend in your life at this moment, that's okay. And there are lots of kind of crisis lines with people available to help, as I mentioned on the first slide. These are kind of some of my favorite things to say when I'm feeling like the day is rough. So I kind of added that at the end. I mentioned kind of like developing kind of some mantras or affirmations you can say to yourself. So here's an example of just a few. And again, just saying these things to yourself, it doesn't really change a lot externally. It doesn't change the amount of homework you have or, you know, how overwhelmed you are feeling, but it can make every task and moment of the day feel a little bit easier when we're kind to ourselves. So that's what I have today in terms of kind of an overview of motivation and breaking it down. Before I get to some student questions, Max, Ryan, is there anything that you want me to clarify or go back to, or any thoughts or questions that you have?
I don't think so. That was really great. Thank you.
Yeah, I didn't really have anything to add. That was awesome.
Okay, great. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to open up the student questions that I kind of highlighted. There were so many good ones. I was telling Ryan and Max I was having a hard time choosing which ones to answer. The first one question is, how do I find what motivates me? So this kind of reminds me of what we touched on earlier in terms of thinking about where you're the most interested, where you're the most curious, and also kind of what your values are. That is frequently where we can find our internal motivation. And as I mentioned before, you can make a list of kind of your values, your top 5 or your top 10, and that's a really good place to start. Also think about just, if you can put school aside, you know, in your mind for a second and just think, what am I most interested in? You know, what am I most curious about? And then, you know, over time you can start to ask yourself like, is there any overlap between the things that I kind of naturally gravitate to, I'm naturally interested in, and what's happening during my school day? So that's really important. And, you know, you can do a quick Google search of like values and you'll get these laundry lists that you can just kind of choose from. So that's what I think is the biggest tool for finding out what motivates you. Worst case scenario, you are still like, I have no idea. I looked at this list of values. I can't think of anything I'm really curious about or passionate about. You know, then I would say like ask around. You know, sometimes the best strategy is just like asking our friends, you know, okay, what do you notice that I'm interested in? You know, when I talk to you, like, what are the subjects that I bring up? Or, you know, what do you think, you know, I'm good at? You know, what do you notice? So you can always lean on your friends for that. I always think that our friends are pretty good at listening to us and kind of knowing what we gravitate towards. The next question, how do you stay motivated when you're tired and bored? That is, I know, one that a lot of people are struggling with right now, especially boredom. There's a lot of monotony, not a lot to break it up. So when you're tired, you know, I really encourage people to rest when you can find space to do that. You know, find moments in your day where you can just let yourself be tired. That's okay. You can take little cat naps. You can take a NASA nap, which is a 26-minute nap. You set your alarm, and that's a good amount of time for your body to get some rest, but also not get super groggy after you've done that. A lot of people say, I don't like to nap because I wake up and I feel like really, really groggy, but at 26 minutes is a good time period to nap. Try to do what you can to get good rest at night. You know, that's the best thing you can do to keep yourself from being tired during the day. And if you find that you're tired and you're bored and you can't rest, you're in the middle of class, the best thing to do is just, to kind of find some things that stimulate the feeling of wakefulness. So a lot of people have on their desk like things that they can fidget with, or kind of something that they can touch that kind of helps kind of ground them in what's going on in the present moment. So having stuff like that around, as long as it's not something that you're noticing is really distracting you, it can be really helpful for just stimulating your brain into, and making it feel like it's more awake or alert. Also, kind of sitting up while you're doing school. I know that a lot of people are doing school from their bedrooms and their beds, and I think that we're just all doing the best we can, and if that's the place that you're most comfortable, then that is absolutely fine, and your body's going to feel more tired if you do that. If you're laying down and if you stay in your pajamas, what actually you're communicating to your body is it's time to go to sleep. So thinking about sitting up, you don't have to get really, maybe you don't have to get dressed in the morning like you used to, or get ready in the morning like you used to. But if you can, get out of your sleeping clothes and, sit at a desk or a table or even upright on your bed, that's going to make you feel more awake. Another question is, what are some of the best ways you stay motivated to do work after you've gotten behind in class? Yeah, definitely. When you feel like you're playing catch up, you are more likely to get overwhelmed. And like I said earlier, overwhelm really decreases motivation. That's when I think really just kind of breaking things down into smaller tasks and thinking about how do I get started on this versus how do I finish this is a good approach to take. Reminding yourself that, you can start with something small, and those little tasks will eventually lead to the completion of a task. So the best way to stay motivated when you've gotten behind is to just break it down into little pieces. Okay, I'm behind. What assignment is most priority right now that I'm behind on? Okay, I'm going to kind of put that at the front of my list. And then if I'm not feeling like doing that, I'm just going to break it down into little pieces. Like that could look like I'm going to do 15 minutes of that today. I'm not going to get it done, but that's going to be 15 minutes closer to finishing it. So just reminding yourself that you don't have to think of the whole thing. You can break it down. What are tactics to keep focus in class? I think I touched on that earlier, but I think, again, sitting up, and getting out of, the clothes that you sleep in, having something on your desk that maybe you can fidget with. There's some research that actually shows that doodling can help people stay focused. Doodling, there's a difference between doodling and like drawing. Like I think if you're focused on like an actual drawing or a sketch, sometimes that can be actually really distracting because you need to focus pretty hard when you're trying to do a nice drawing. But just doodling, just lines on a page, that sometimes can help people stay focused, and there's some research to support that. Somebody said that they're feeling depressed and that getting out of bed, showering, eating feels like a lot of effort. What's the best way to combat motivation problems if basic needs are hard to meet? So again, going back to some things that I touched on, it's fantastic that this student is recognizing what's going on, just kind of having a good evaluation of things. If you are feeling depressed, it is going to be harder to take care of your basic needs. And the first step is just identifying that that's what's going on, that's like your biggest barrier to motivation. If you're feeling depressed, I think, really leaning on your supports is very important. Talking to people that make you feel better is really, really important. Talking to people who will listen to you and who will kind of validate that this is hard, and who can kind of comfort you if you're feeling low. So getting that support is really essential. And when you're finding basic needs are hard to meet, again, just start with something, figuring out like, how do I get enough sleep and shower, make sure I'm meeting my hygiene needs and eating 3 healthy meals a day. That's a lot to think about. So maybe just choose one of those things. Just going to focus on like trying to sleep more, or I'm just going to focus on the eating. whatever it is that feels the easiest to do, start there. And the last question that I chose was, what causes some people to be more motivated than others? Thought this was a great question, and I'll try not to take too much time on this. But some people have just a type of personality. It's called actually an upholder personality. And it is actually not a large percent of the population. About 20% of the population has this personality. And those are the people that you meet that you find like have a pretty easy time. Like if somebody tells them to do something, they're probably going to do it. If they make a goal for themselves, a New Year's resolution, they're likely to follow through on it. And so some people just are kind of wired that way. And other people are wired differently and need more kind of external accountability. Sometimes that's what really helps people stay motivated, is somebody saying like, hey, I know you have this thing you need to do, and I'm checking in with you about it, whether that's a friend or a parent or a teacher. And some people also like need to have really strong rationales to do something. So one thing I suggest, if you're someone that you know is kind of a questioner, like you're like, why do I have to do that? Why is this important to me? Make sure to ask your teachers for those rationales. It is absolutely acceptable to say like, I can't quite figure out how this is valuable, what we're learning today or what this assignment is. Can you help me? Because I will be more likely to do this work if I kind of know, how it's related to the bigger picture or what the value is. And sometimes adults forget to do that. Sometimes we leave rationales out. So it's okay to ask for those. So people just have different personalities. None of them are actually better or worse than another. Upholder personalities have their own weaknesses too. But that's why you notice kind of a difference between people and their motivation. So if you notice your motivation is lower than someone else, try to find some accountability for yourself too. Someone who can check in with you about, hey, you said you were going to get this thing done. Where are you at with that? Or someone who can give you really strong rationales so that you know what the value is of doing something. So those are the questions that I chose. Again, there were tons more of great questions. I just know we don't have time for it today. Brian and Max, is there anything else that you'd like to talk about or close out with?
Not really. We just want to say, like, on behalf of ourselves and on behalf of like all of Lincoln, thank you so much for doing this. This is definitely very helpful for a lot of students and can hopefully impact some people.
Yeah, thank you so
Absolutely.
much.
Thank you. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Of course.
Take care.
You too.
Bye.